Well, good morning, Harry Atherton. Have you just had a brandy in your coffee for breakfast?
I'm sorry, just had a what?
Brandy.
A brandy. Heavens no, not at this time of day. Even though we're an
That's
hour
it.
ahead of you in France. But
That's the only reason I come to France is to have brandy in my coffee at breakfast.
oh my goodness. No, we're an hour ahead of you. The sun will be over the yard arm in an hour here. So
Right. Yes.
then we
I mean,
can.
tell me, an expat living in France, have you taken to drinking wine quite the way the French do?
Wine, I drink in moderation. I have brought with me or traveled with me around the world an affection for beer.
Ah,
And so in all the various countries I've lived or worked in, I've sampled the local beer, sometimes to excess. Um, but wine is no. I'm a modest wine drinker. I appreciate good wine and French wine. The top French wines are probably still the best in the world, but the average French wines are now being beaten out of the market by, I won't say new rivals because they've been around for a long time. I mean, California wines are well established, but now Australia, South Africa, New Zealand for whites, of course, and above all whites, and new entrants such as Romania, Bulgaria, Spain, and Chile are well established. So I think the French wine industry has got quite a challenge on its hands. As I say, the top ones are still exceptional. They're very refined. But if you want an average glass of wine or a bottle of wine at a reasonable price, you probably tend to be a little bit more adventurous geographically and go to some of these newer countries.
yes. And some of these wines come from countries that you've traveled in extensively.
Oh, quite a bit, yeah, but not for the purpose of the wine drinking, I can assure you.
we bill you, by the way, is Harry in France and other parts,
Hmm.
and you're rapidly becoming our travel expert because you've traveled to so many places. But in keeping with the theme of this station, you're able to give little histories and backgrounds to these places, which is very informative and very popular. You'll look forward to with that sort of combination. So keep it up.
Well, history is an interesting thing, insofar as we tend to think it represents depth in time, when in reality it's probably depth in experience. You take European history, which moves at a very slow pace, or did move at a very slow pace for hundreds of years, and we think of a new country, let's say like North America, like the States or Canada, as being relatively new and therefore having relatively little history. But it's not true. It's simply the history of these newer nations are compressed, and the speed in which things happened and let's take the United States, for instance. If we talk about the history of railroading, railroads, well, I guess the steam engine, Trevithick, 1824, first railway, the Stockton Darlington Railway in 1836, George Stephenson's effort. And then Europe starts to embrace railways in the 50s, the 1850s. And then along comes the Civil War in the United States, and the states amalgamate their various incipient railroads into the single railroad, the GMR, the Great Military Railroad, to supply the troops on the front. And between 1861 and 1863, the GMR, the Great Military Railroad, builds more rail trackage than exists in the entire world, and they develop
Really?
locomotives. They develop a skill in railroading, which leads then to the enormous expansion westwards in the late 60s, 1860s. Finally, the last spike being driven at Ogden Point, Utah in 69, with the Union Pacific, the Southern Pacific competing to see who will get to the West Coast first. And so, where's the history of railroading? The history of railroading is in the United States. There's a gradual story being told in Europe, but its explosion, the depth of its history, is in the United States. So there's a simple example of how you get history compressed. And so a relatively young nation like the United States of America has probably got more railroad history than other countries, which you think of as being much older. And that applies to so many spheres. It applies to industry. It applies to the Industrial Revolution. I mean, a total explosion by 1876. The United States had become a major industrial power in just barely 10 years. It became a service economy in 1922. So years and years ahead of European countries. France, the country where I live now, was still an agricultural economy up to the Second World War. It hadn't even transitioned yet through a service economy at that point. So history is compressed. Architecture, buildings were renewed. Take Canada. Take the town where you and I grew up to a large degree, Vancouver. The development of buildings, very often they only lasted a generation. The Hotel Vancouver, the first one built in 1876, second one built, I think, in the 20s, and the third one built in 1948. I mean, 3 Hotel Vancouvers, 3 successive at all different architectural styles, all disappeared. So it's all very well taking an old hotel in Europe that has been there for 300 years, but look at the development in simple building. We renewed, knock down and renew, expansion. It's a totally different concept of history.
Yeah, yeah. Incidentally, you used the word United States several times. Bill Bryson claims that Tom Paine coined the phrase the United States. And if you look at the ceiling above me, in fact, that is where that was over Tom Paine's head when he was formulating his novel, and not novel, is tome, The Rights of Man. So you see how we all get linked together one way or another.
Indeed, we do. And I'm looking at that now above you. Yes, it's a sort of minstrel's gallery, I suppose you'd call that, wouldn't you?
Well, you would. It's now a bar, but
well, minstrels have been known to imbibe as well, I suppose.
Many a song has been sung in this place. Yes,
indeed. Yes.
Now, Harry, you were talking. There are 2 ladies in your life that you promised to deliver for us. One is your wife, and the other is a young lady who is head of the tourist board there.
Well, I'm still working on the lady from the tourist board. She's a young lady, very capable, and I'm sure she'll tell a great story when we finally get her on board about the history of the little town in France where I live now, Domfront-Poiré, as it's now been renamed. Interesting point, Poiré. Poiré comes from the Perry cider made out of apples, and which this region is famous. But we'll come back to that at some stage later, I'm quite sure. And the second lady, not necessarily in that order in my life, is my good lady wife. And she has just annoyed me with at the moment because I've just had to try and renew my British passport. We've been down to one of these automatic passport picture-taking machines, and it totally dominated it. In fact, it kept saying it doesn't conform with what the passport office wants, and the machine started swearing at us in the end. At least, mind you. And so she's very upset, and she's gone and hidden away because we can't even make the machine work. So I'm quite worried now because my passport runs out in next year, and I understand it takes quite a long time to renew a British passport now. There's a bit of a backlog, I've heard.
Yes.
So,
Well, you can assure her it's not you, because I had the same. I had to take my photograph at least 6 or 8 times before I managed to get it to the machine to accept it. Yes.
yes, and then in the end, we had only photographs that weren't suitable, but we decided to risk it with one of them, and then it wouldn't accept payment. We tried to pay. So you're looking at a very frustrated gentleman, and you're not looking at a very frustrated wife who's gone and hidden away in the kitchen, banging the pots and pans because of this damn machine not wanting to deliver.
Well, when these things happen, Harry, I stamp my little feet and I say, "Oh, the kids have been at it in the basement again. They invent all these things that are meant to speed things up for us. They only go wrong or are too difficult for people of our generation anyway to use, and it slows us down."
Well, this is it. We've had to move on from the quill pen, I suppose, and dipping into ink, and get into computers. And I suppose people of our age are quite resistant, not just in practical terms, but I think getting our minds around these new technologies is a challenge to us. I remember trying to buy an airline ticket many years ago, and having great difficulty with the machine. And a young kid came up behind me, and I think he must have been at least eight years old. And he did it in 2 minutes. And he said, "Here you are, you stupid old something or other." His language is as advanced as his technological skills.
Well, Professor Mark Maybe, who comes on to at exactly your time on a Wednesday to talk about education and so on, he actually keeps a fountain pen, a pocket watch, and one or two other little bits and pieces that we would have used, in 1960, 1970, to show to students with a clue what they are.
That's amazing, isn't it? Yes.
Isn't it?
But that's the advance of technology. We can't fight it. We've got to go along with the flow. But hasn't every generation faced that challenge?
I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
Harry, what's the atmosphere like in France at the moment with the World Cup played there? And actually, I don't know whether you watched it last night or both of them games yesterday, but I mean, it really is rugby at its very best.
It was indeed. It was a wonderful game, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Of course, I watched it because like you, I'm a rugby freak, and so no, excellent game. Two first-class teams, the ones that I suppose we should have seen in the final. Really, it was almost watching the final game last night. But it's going back to your question about what's the reaction in France. They are hiding away. The newscasts this morning gave one-line reports about South Africa having won the semi-final or quarter-final, whatever it is, and nothing about France having lost it. It's a very chauvinistic country, and they're hiding that. They don't want to admit it. And of course, it has been, and will be a national trauma because the French team is exceptionally good, and and it's their tournament. It's a home-based tournament, and it was hoped, of course, by everybody that France would come out champions. And France needs a bit of a boost at the moment. Morale is down generally with the economic situation, one thing and another. So it will have a rather dampening effect on French psychological effect almost. It's going to be a period of mourning when we won't be really truly allowed to talk about it.
They have nothing to be ashamed of. They put on a brilliant display.
What a brilliant display, and it could have gone either way, and that's the name of the game. Amazing headline I saw in one newspaper or magazine a couple of days ago, and it was it was asking if rugby was a right wing game, and only people of right wing philosophy played it. But I'm sure it's been democratized now for many years. It used to be a little bit of a posh thing back 50, 60 years ago, public schools and all that. But I think it's totally a game that anybody can participate in now.
And anybody does. Yes.
Indeed, it brings. I find it a means of bringing the different classes in society together and in a comradeship, and it works in opposite way. But it was amazing how this article argued the fact that it was a posh right wing game. Still think they're 50, 60 years out of date. However, that's a side story. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think there are still one or two people in this country who, if you say Tory, they say toff, which nothing could be further from the truth, of course. But
of course.
Those old-fashioned ideas stick, I think, with certain families, and there's always somebody willing to listen to them. But just generally speaking, Harry, has the hosting of the World Cup been good for French tourism?
I think it's been a great boost for France. France has these events, and they've got the Olympics coming up next year, and Paris is in a little bit of a panic because things are not unfolding as they should. Again, talking politics, there's a very left-wing administration in power in Paris, with ideas that they feel, I'm sure, are quite noble, such as almost banning the motor car and that sort of thing, and offering other priorities than what the people really want. And Paris is becoming a little bit down market, and there's a problem with health problems, sanitation, rats, garbage pickup, and that sort of like what is in one of the most beautiful cities in the world is on the back of mountain events and hasn't seemed to have had any negative impact on the Rugby World Cup. But there is a threat to the Olympics, and there's some concerns. They've now been hit by a bed bug epidemic, where beds in hotels, and that's putting a lot of people off. I think it's being exaggerated, and they'll probably get that sorted out before the Olympics come along. But Paris in particular, I think, is suffering at the moment from a peculiar direction it's taken. Well, mind you, I say Paris in particular, I get the feeling that London, in a way, is also heading down a particular philosophical path, which is not necessarily to the wishes of the Londoners, and certainly of the greater London population. And so one can imagine that this is a phenomenon which is particularly born of major cities developing political philosophies which are not in tune with the people. Whether they're right or wrong, I'm not here to say. I'm not qualified to say. But I do think we're moving into a period of greater social upheaval than we have had for some time. Yeah,
I think that's right, and I think that if you're reflecting that that's happening in France, it most certainly is happening in Britain, and therefore I suspect is happening in a number of other countries that we don't get reports from. I mean, even Melissa Conte, who comes on a Friday afternoon from New York, says that there is a good deal of social upheaval there for exactly the same reason. I mean, she quotes the fact that she goes past posh hotels which are given over to immigrants. Does that sound familiar? And also that New Yorkers aren't in tune with the sort of open door policy towards asylum seekers and so on and so forth that the government is. So yes, even across the water, I think that you're absolutely right. I think the Western world is in the grip of this.
No, there is a problem here, and of course, it's a very delicate subject because the specter of racism and all sorts of things are raised. But if society has changed too quickly and too abruptly, it's bound to create some form of social upheaval because countries can only assimilate newer identities at a limited rate. And only if the people wish to join into the society that they've gone to, if they've gone because of famine or war or disease, was one thing. But if it's purely economic immigration for economic reasons to get a better life, hopefully get a better life, and they just want to bring their culture with them and they don't want to integrate into the culture of the host nation, there's bound to be conflict between the newcomers and the established people. And that's, I think, what we're seeing in many parts of the world right now.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. You surprised me in some ways by saying that up until the Second World War, France was an agrarian country. But, we always get the impression that the farmers, the agrarian community, have a great deal of power. I mean, if they go on strike and put their tractors in the streets and so on, so absolute mayhem. Is that not so?
Well, I think, in a way, if we've got pure economists watching this program, they disagree with me completely because, of course, France became a very prominent industrial nation, and by the 1870s, 1880s, there's no question of that. But when I talk about an agricultural economy, and I'm being very selective here, I talk about the number of people who worked the land, for instance. And up to the Second World War, you had 2.2 million French people working the land directly. Now you only have 200,000. Now that's because of technology. It's made labor much more mechanized. So that's been a factor. But attitudinally, the French think of themselves as a green agricultural society. And the result being that the farmers have much more power than their normal economic weight would allow. So it's an attitudinal thing too. It's reflected in so many aspects. The French consider themselves the home of gastronomy, and in many ways, if you think of modern gastronomy, which was launched in France in the late 1890s with great chefs like Escoffier. Yes, you can justify that, but now the whole world has become a gastronomic wonderland. And top restaurants, I believe the top restaurant is currently in Chile or somewhere like that. I mean, it's amazing how the art of cooking has been become much more cosmopolitan and much more internationally recognized. But France still believes that their form of cooking is the best. It's very good, it's exceptionally good, but it's within the context of French cooking only, and it has to find its place and finally accept its partnership with other forms of cuisine and cooking around the world. So it's what a nation feels it is, just as much as what the figures suggest that it would be. And these are the. This is why I say that France remained had an agricultural mindset with a large proportion of people working the land right until the Second World War. Statistics will probably show that the sectors of the economy which were industrialized were more or less keeping pace with other advancing nations at the time. And you see the ups and downs, the uneven pattern of development of nations, where some nations have a very even history. They don't have big peaks and big valleys. The history of Britain has been recent history of Britain has been relatively level, whereas France and Germany, let's say, have had huge ups and downs when they've hit the peak and then dropped into the trough and then rebuilt again. It's almost a reflection of the character of these nations. So it's very judged to compare apples and oranges when
Yes.
considering if the true expert in this field would probably disagree with me completely and justifiably show a batch of figures to prove it. But
I think you make a lot of sense.
The French remains that kind of the attitudinal mindset of the French is food, is farming, is beauty, is the quality of life, and work is something that you've got to do simply because you have to, and should be avoided at all costs. And yet the figures show that the French are very highly productive per capita. So how do you compare these two approaches to a common problem?
I don't want us to get too deeply into politics, but there seems to have been, in the last couple of presidential elections, a drift to the right, with Marine Le Pen doing quite well. Is there any particular reason for that?
I think a drift to the right in the French context needs to be qualified. My impression is, and I'm not an expert in this field, but my impression is that most countries have a particular political identity. You've got the right and the left, but the center is not always in the same place. It could be more to the left or more to the right. I would say that the center, for instance, in Britain is more or less in the middle. In the United States, I'd say it's more or less to the right. You get the Democratic Party, which is theoretically the left-wing party, has got some extremely right-wing members to it, and whereas the center of the political divide in France is way to the left. It remains a country which still is scarred by its revolution, not that long ago, when you think about it, and the nation has never really come together since. The political base of French thinking is wing. So when somebody comes along like Marine Le Pen, who is right wing to a degree, but not extreme right wing, she's considered to be ultra right wing to the French when she isn't. She's in fact, she has what she's done to try and make the what was the Front National, maintenant Rassemblement National, make it respectable, is to become the party of the working class. She probably is the representative now of the working class. So it begs the question, what's happened to the socialists? Well, they've become captives to all sorts of new philosophies, such as ecology and internationalism and that sort of thing. Marine Le Pen is not right wing at all in the kind of politics she's proposing. It's amazing that she should be considered so. She's representing the workers now, I believe, and the working class is flooding to support her. You've got the closet socialists. You've got the just as you have the closet conservatives, the Islington aspect of what we call the champagne socialists. I forget the word now that we use, but it truly is. There are very few right wing politicians in France. It's mostly left wing.
I wonder, you just mentioned the revolution. I wonder if I could just divert for a moment, because I'm famous for my red herrings anyway. But just to say that the gentleman that we talked about a little while ago, Tom Paine, he was charged with essentially treason in this country. And he, in fact, he said, "I will stand trial." And his friends said, "You won't win, because the king's against you." So they persuaded him to leave Britain, and he went over and joined Robespierre. And he fell out with Robespierre and was incarcerated. And he was ready for the guillotine. He was standing in the corridor chatting to some other prisoners, and his door was open. And the chap who was saying who should go to the guillotine chalked X on each door, but his was open. So his X went onto the inside. So when the door was shut, they missed him, and he managed to get back to the United States.
Amazing. Now, correct me here. Tom Paine was he born in Lewes?
No, he was born in Norwich, I think, or near to Norwich, but he spent 7 years here as a customs officer, and this is where he wrote and developed The Rights of Man. And in fact, on this hotel, there is a plaque that says that this is where, because of his writings and teachings and so on, this was the cradle of American independence.
Well, I've always associated him with Lewes. So he's a Norwichman, was it? That I wasn't aware of.
Well, the remarkable thing is that he had no formal education. His father apparently was a corset maker, and he was apprenticed to him. This remarkable intellect. I mean, there are lots of things that most people know about Tom Paine and starting the American Revolution and so on and so forth. But he was also a great inventor. He invented the One Arch Bridge, for instance, and he was inspired with that by American rivers, which would come down in the winter and would knock the pilings out from the bridge because of the ice and so on. And he invented the One Arch Bridge, and there was an example of it right up until I think about 1930 near to Sunderland. One of the other things that always amuses me that he invented was the smokeless candle, because people would read at night with the candle, and the fumes that gave off from those candles would kill them. And he invented the smokeless candle, mainly, I think, so that he could read at night.
Where does he fit in with Telford in terms of this bridge design building? Because Robert Telford, his Iron Bridge. That's going back now. That's 1730s or something, 1738 perhaps. I'm not sure of my dates here. But that's a single arch bridge, isn't it?
I don't know.
Up in Shropshire.
With inventing it, and he may well have been the inventor of the internal combustion engine for cars. But he worked with Benjamin Franklin and another boat maker in Boston. And they were busy inventing an engine for ships, for boats, and they did. But they never thought of putting it onto the horseless carriage.
So Tom Paine, he died in the States, did he? He died.
Yes, he did. Well, actually, he died a drunk. The unfortunate thing is that this brilliant man upset the American polite society with his book, which basically said, "Forget God, put your trust in man." And as you know, his trusting God is on the American coins. So he ceased to be a hero, and he died in his small estate, 1812, not 1812. No, earlier than that, a little earlier than that. But the strange thing is that it was 8 years before anybody decided to bring his body back to the United Kingdom. And fans of his and friends brought it back, and they lost his head on the way.
Oh my goodness!
And there is a historian here in Lewes whose sole life has been trying to find his head, but in so doing, they lost his body. So nobody knows where Tom Paine's head or body is, and it's tragedy, really.
That's an interesting thought. Bodies without heads.
Yes.
There's a theory that if you find a body with a severed head and the head is still there, it was probably an execution. If you find a body without a head, it was probably a murder because that we're hiding the means of identifying the
Right.
yeah. Anyway, but that's a side story. I'm sure people in the coroner's field would be much better qualified than I to talk about that. Yeah.
But it is interesting, isn't it, how historical figures wrap countries together. The United Kingdom, France, the United States, and all through really one man. A remarkable man, but nonetheless, just through one man. Not that history would recognize it as being that, but that is the theme, if you like, of the three countries.
Well, nations develop along similar lines, but differently. I mean, that's a fairly obvious statement to make. But it is interesting to see how it begs the question: what would have happened if America had remained part of Britain? They obviously would have gained independence at some stage, and just because empires became out of fashion,
Yes.
it could have changed the world quite considerably. Pax Americana, which we're seeing witness of that right now, with a couple of carrier groups going off to Israel in the current upheaval. But if it's the old "if my aunt had been my uncle" theory.
Yes.
What would have happened? We'll never know, of course. History is unpredictable.
No.
It repeats itself, but it's unpredictable. And therefore it's controversial.
And all the European countries found that far-flung lands became ungovernable as society progressed with technology.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, indeed, and it's when we see what the effect has been in the United States with the huge developments, the impact that people like Steve Jobs has had. And it's changed the whole world. And normally we think of technology making great advances during periods of war, but no, I think there's a new dynamic at work in the world today, which is probably helping ensure that there is some peaceful evolution as opposed to violent evolution.
Yes,
I'm not discouraged with the way the world is going. I think we're at a turning point, but we're beginning to evaluate things more in human terms than not political or material terms. So I've got quite a lot of hope.
Yes.
As I grow old, I've got quite a lot of hope in the future of the world.
Right. Let's just get off the rather serious but interesting talk that we've had, because earlier in the week I was asked whether what was my favourite meal, and I said pot au feu, believe it or not. It's a marvelous meal. But I tell everybody how much you've traveled the world, and that you bring that expertise to this program, as well as our good chats about all sorts of other things. What is your favorite meal from the entire world? Horrible question to be asked just like that, I know, but just cast a thought.
Well, politically, my favorite meal is anything that my wife cooks. But you came pretty close to touching my heart there. Pot au feu, that exists in most societies. It's an old peasant dish. The pot au feu in the French traditional style. It's kept going. Kept adding things, and the pot was never cleaned. It just simply had new additions. So a good old peasant food isn't bad. And growing up during the war, when there wasn't a lot to eat, and our parents went without to make sure us kids got a decent meal, that was the kind of food we ate, and that's the kind of food that I think we grew to appreciate. The sophistication of food is all very well, but in search of taste, I think to enjoy a good meal, the first ingredient is you've got to be hungry. And that's when you enjoy food. You appreciate your food when you're hungry, and a good old cheese sandwich is unbeatable when you need something to put into the stomach. So I think there's a lot of snobbery has been built around food. Restaurants are trying to rework food, and so it becomes unrecognizable at times. Whether they achieve the ultimate taste of the carrot, it no longer looks like a carrot; it looks like a work of Picasso when on a plate. Um, but no, I'd go back for simple food. I think I'd agree with you. If it isn't a pot au feu, it's going to be something like it. I think going back to my Yorkshire origins, there was a dish called panacalty. I believe it was designed to use up all the meat that couldn't be eaten normally, and so they baked the hell out of it and put potatoes and stuff in it and onions, and by God, did it taste good.
Good. One of the things that I found from my time in Canada, and perhaps you found it as well, is that North Americans are not very keen on offal.
No, and well, and to a degree, I wonder to what extent the British are. The British are more pedestrian in their tastes, I think. It took a long time, I think, before the British started eating snails. They would laugh at the French for eating snails, but I think that the Anglo-Saxon approach to food is much more. It's less adventurous, I think, than different parts of the world. Of course, they eat the strangest things, and well, to us they're strange,
Yes.
but to them it's perfectly normal. So it's not. It doesn't surprise me that the Americans turn their backs on some of these more exotic offerings.
One of the interesting things is I was researching a program at one time, and you will be familiar with the term "eating humble pie."
Mm-hmm.
Well, it
yes,
is not.
indeed.
It's not eating humble pie. It's eating humble pie with a capital U.
Oh
And
no, that
humble,
isn't that. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, humble was that when the deer was killed, the lord of the manor would have the haunches, venison, etc., etc. But the peasants would have the umble, which were the innards,
Oh
the
my
offal.
goodness.
Yes. So
Well, I've learned something there.
umble is offal, and eating umble pie.
Mhm. Well, I've
It's
learned
just been.
something. That's
Yes.
brand new to me. I never knew that. Yeah. Gosh. I shall go away from. I shall go away much richer this morning and knowledge and
Well, I often
culinary.
thought that I would like to be a peasant, actually, because I rather like offal, and my turn in eating deer, particularly in Canada, where it would come from the wilds, was that it was bloody awful.
Yeah, but but we're skating on thin ice here because why do vegetarians not want to eat any form of meat? And we get into the idea of it, the fact that carnivores have we. Is it that they don't want to eat anything that's been alive? Is there a little bit of the vegetarian in all of us? And to what degree are we prepared to eat some of these more unusual parts of the beast? Obviously, you've overcome that. I'm still a bit of a squeamish eater.
Are
There's
you?
many things that I couldn't conceive of eating, even today.
Well, I must confess is that you talk about our parents, and in my case, because my father was away at war and so on, is my grandparents looked after us at the cost of themselves. But my grandmother always made what I loved, and that was a vegetable marrow with mince put in the middle and baked in the oven. And I thought that was an absolutely wonderful meal.
Of course it is. Oh, wonderful memories. Grandmother's cooking, yeah. I guess that's where we're basically in agreement then. When you talk about pot au feu, we're looking for the old traditional styles of cooking. And that's coming back in a way. There's quite a few restaurants in France now that have boeuf bourguignon as a staple offer. And oh gosh, my recent trip to Britain, I couldn't find a restaurant that did not have sticky sticky treacle pudding or whatever it was called. And
so, yes, that's right. That's right.
Yes,
absolutely. I'm looking over my shoulder because I have as my co-host this morning Jed, who is a collie terrier. This morning before you, we have the two bees, the two barristers, and Richard brings his dog down to sit with me while he goes and prosecutes somebody.
Oh my goodness! Well, I just saw a young lady in the background there. She seemed to be.
Well, the young lady comes on after you. She is. I don't know whether you would remember, because I know that you used to be a journalist in and do some stuff in the entertainment industry. Her sister was Jill Day, who was a very well-known singer in the 1950s, 60s.
Jill Day. That rings a bell, but no, I can't recall her. But and that's her sister.
Indeed, and her name is Liza Page, and Liza was a singer and traveled throughout Vietnam and all over the world, she sang for a little while with the something 5. Or was it 7? And my mind has just gone for a moment. But the gentleman who wrote all the James Bond movie music.
Okay.
So she's quite famous as well. She now comes, and actually she's very much into the alternative view. So she takes a poke at all governments.
Well, so she should. Yeah. Keep them on their toes.
Yes.
Keep them on their toes. Yeah.
Anyway. She used to appear on a Friday, but we're switching things around a little bit. So she's coming in on a Monday, and I must say that our Monday is a very powerful day, Harry, because we start off with the two barristers. We then come to you, and then we finish off with Liza. And all three of you are excellent broadcasters. You all very interesting people, and you're all very knowledgeable in your own fields. And it makes a very interesting day. So we kick off the week in a very powerful way on this television station.
Well, that's good, and I wish Mirador every success, and I'm sure it's.
Well, you're part of it now. There's no getting away, you know.
Well, indeed. Good.
Well, we'll look forward to having one of your two ladies on next week, or as soon as you can persuade them. And thank you once again for a very entertaining, but also an informative session this morning, Harry.
Pleasure, my pleasure. Okay, Keith.
See you next week.
Okay, catch up with you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Well, there we are. Harry Atherton from France, and as we say, Harry in France and other parts. Very interesting stuff from around the world as well. All right, well, we'll take a little break now, and then Liza Page will be with you in a few minutes' time. So let's. That seems to have disappeared as well. Never mind. We'll just play ourselves out on the usual way. Here we go. I think.